He sat, cleaning his weapons, and tried his best to ignore his own reflection. It wasn't easy. The room was small and dingy with a single bed, bathroom, and not much else. The mirror was bolted to the back of the door and reflected the entire room. He glanced up again. A moth, drawn to a burning flame. This time, he did not look away from the stranger glaring back at him. Raising his hand, he slowly ran it over the mass of scar tissue that used to be his face. Only the eyes remained whole and untouched. Green and wild with the atrocities he had committed in the name of God. Dropping his hand to his throat, he let his fingers trail over the ruined flesh, scarred by tooth and claw, down further over the broad expanse of his chest. Here the scars were faded and white with age. These had been his first, the first of many more to come in a life of pain and violence that spanned nearly 30 years. He dropped his eyes back to his weapons and continued with the oiling, stripping and cleaning. This was an old ritual for him. Perhaps his own fucked up version of meditation. If this was so, it wasn't working today. Cursing, he fitted the last parts of his weapons together and headed for the bathroom. With rough, jerky movements, he stripped off his clothes and flung them into the corner before stepping into the shower, eager to wash away the cold sweat that seemed to cover every inch of his body. After a while, the steamy water began to do its job and he began to relax. With a sigh, he rotated his neck, releasing the tension as he began to wash himself down. He was a big man, nearly 6.5 feet, with a large frame heavily corded with muscle. His hair was a black mop, just starting to show the first hints of grey. As an orphan boy, he'd grown up with the church and had turned into a handsome youth, but that had been before the training, the missions, and the scars. Almost unconsciously, he dropped his hands to the deep wounds that ran across his chest. Out of all the creatures he had hunted and killed, it had been the church that had wounded him the deepest, and in doing so, had not only saved his life, but his immortal soul. Thousands of blood-soaked nights had passed since that terrible night, and although he had only been a small child, he remembered it completely. It had been late that night when his father had finally returned home, his mood as black as the dark mud that stuck to his boots and streaked his damp trousers. With a grunt, he slammed the door closed against the night and kicked off his muddy boots before cracking open his shotgun across his arm, removing the gleaming shells and locking both away. Only after he'd shrugged out of his heavy jacket did he notice a young Johnny sitting on the stairs, snug and warm in his Thomas the Tank Engine pyjamas, Pooh Bear clamped in one tiny fist. At first, a flash of annoyance had crossed his father's face, and then he gave a rueful smile and ruffled the boy's hair. "You're up late, Johnny. Isn't it time you was in bed, lad?" He wanted to wait up for you. his mother said from across the room where she sat by a crackling fire, a basket of knitting in her lap. "Did you see anything?" "Perhaps," his father replied, scooping Johnny up and taking a seat across from his wife, happy for the flickering fire's warmth. "Perhaps," his mother repeated. "Shadows," his father said, looking troubled for a moment. "I thought I saw a shape. A dog, perhaps." "Well, that would explain a lot," she said, winding up a ball of pink wool. "All those dead sheep, a wild dog pack maybe. You probably scared them away for the night. A few fence repairs and a couple of nights with the sheep locked safely away in the barn should set things to right." "And if not?" his father asked, lighting his pipe. "Then a few more nights out in the cold for you." "Oh, don't look so cross," she chuckled. "I'll pack you a flask of soup and you can wear your thermal pants." Even Johnny got to laughing at that one. His father was just about to reply when there came a sharp knock on the door. His father stood up, gently settling Johnny down on the living room rug before glancing at the clock on the mantelpiece. It was 10:30 on a Thursday night on a quiet country road. Not exactly the right time for neighbours to come calling. Glancing at his wife with a shrug, he headed for the door. His father had just turned the latch when the door flew open and a naked man fell through the doorway, collapsing in a boneless heap upon the living room floor. The man was completely naked, covered from head to toe in blood. "Jesus Christ!" his father shouted, quickly kneeling by the man's side and gently turning him over. "Help me!" the man croaked. "Where are you hurt? Sweet Jesus, you're covered in blood." "Blood," the man growled, his voice suddenly stronger. "Yes, blood," he said, his eyes fixing on Johnny's father. "But not mine." Suddenly, his hand shot out, grabbing him by the throat as he effortlessly flowed to his feet, throwing his father across the room in one fluid motion, sending him crashing into the wall with bone-numbing force. Johnny's mother screamed, scooped up her knitting needles before jumping in front of the crying Johnny. "What are you going to do with those, bitch?" the man growled. "Knit me to death." Suddenly the man started to change. His body seemed to grow longer, taller. His hands twisted and danced by his side as his fingers elongated. Razor-sharp claws shearing through his fingertips in an explosion of blood and shredded flesh. But it was the man's face that Johnny couldn't look away from. As he watched on, the man's face began to change, his nose flattening, his jaw growing heavy as razor-sharp teeth burst through his gums, filling his mouth with blood where it drooled down his chin, matting in the coarse black hair that now covered his entire body. Johnny's mother had time to let out a single ear-piercing shriek before her mind crumbled in terror and she fell hard to the floor in a dead faint. For a moment, the creature just stood there, its blood-filled mouth agape before bursting into a growling, gibbering laughter. Then it stopped, Its obscene chuckling ended, and it fell on all fours, slowly slouching its way towards Johnny. "What will you do now, little chicken?" the thing snarled. Johnny felt his bladder let go as he took a step towards the open door, hot, shameful piss running down his leg. The creature's eyes flicked in the direction of the open doorway, then back to Johnny, pinning him in place. Suddenly it moved in a blur of motion, slashing at Johnny's chest, shredding his clothes and leaving burning lines in the flesh beneath. With a cry, he staggered back, clutching at his bleeding chest, calling out his father's name. "Too late for him, boy," the creature said. "I can already smell him starting to rot. This one, however," it grinned, running a razor-tipped finger up to his mother's denim-clad thigh, "is very much alive. Do you know what I'm going to do to your precious mummy, boy? I'm going to fuck her until she begs me to stop. And then I'm going to fuck her some more, and when I am finished, I'm going to tear out her throat and eat her up just like the big bad wolf at Granny's house." "Please," Johnny begged, but the creature just laughed. "Too late for that, boy. But I will tell you what I will do. I shall let you run while I entertain your mother. After all, there's nothing like a good chase to burn off the night's excess. Run!" The thing howled, springing forward. "Run before I change my mind." With a scream, Johnny turned and ran. The last thing he saw as he fled into the night was the creature ripping at his mother's clothes. The rest was a nightmare of tearing branches and cold-sucking mud as he ran through the forest under the sailing light of a silvered moon. Crying, exhausted and bleeding, he finally staggered onto the roadside and collapsed into merciful darkness. He awoke some time later, wrapped in a coarse blanket, being carried in strong arms. The steeple of St. Anthony's looming out of the darkness. He began to struggle and cry out, "Stop that, boy, I'll be thankful. His mercy that I found you when I did. If we hurry, there may still be time." Johnny stopped his struggling at once as he recognized the voice of Father Peter, the parish priest. "My mother," he sobbed. "There was a man." "There are men coming to take care of your mother, Johnny," the priest said, unlocking the church door and quickly stepping inside. He set Johnny down on a nearby pew and locked the door behind them. "We should be safe now," he breathed, leaning heavily against the door. "Those things cannot enter the house of God." That said, he turned and scooped Johnny up again before rushing through the small church and into the back rooms that were his living quarters. There he dropped Johnny into a ragged-looking armchair before disappearing through a curtained archway, returning only moments later, carrying a small earthenware jar and a length of rope. "Come on, boy," he said, pulling Johnny to his feet and dragging him back into the night-darkened church. Releasing him, he lit a few fat white candles and positioned them around the altar. "Come here, Johnny," he said, holding out his hand to the boy who was now crouching down behind a row of pews, the blanket wrapped tight about him like a second skin. "Come here," the priest repeated, a sweat breaking across his brow. There is no time for such foolishness. But still, Johnny would not come. This man seemed like a stranger to him. Gone was the smiling Father Peter who ruffled his hair as he left the Sunday sermon with his mum and dad. In his place was this coarser stranger who shoved and pushed and cared nothing about a small boy's tears. "Listen now," Father Peter said, edging closer towards the cowering boy. "Listen carefully, Johnny. You are in grave danger. Not only must your body, but your very soul. The end of times is upon us. Satan's beast has marked you. We must purge you of this vileness before it is too late." Johnny had begun to back away as the priest came forward. Now he turned to run, but it was too late. Father Peter lunged after him, grabbing him by the wrist and dragging him back towards the altar. Johnny went wild, kicking and screaming, struggling and biting. "Forgive me, Johnny," Father Peter gasped as he crashed his fist into the boy's jaw. Stars exploded in Johnny's head, and his knees unhinged. He was scooped up before he could hit the floor and was laid gently across the stone altar. He swam in dark waters of unconsciousness until he felt the cruel burn of ropes digging into the scant flesh of his naked arms. What are you doing?" Johnny murmured, his vision sliding in and out of focus. "I am sorry, Johnny. Sorry for the pain I must cause you. One day you will understand, and on that day I will beg your forgiveness, but until that day, we must travel a cruel road together." That said, he unscrewed the lid from the small jar Johnny had noticed earlier and dipped in his fingers before rubbing them experimentally under his nose. The smell hit Johnny in a wave of putrescence, causing his whole body to tremble and his stomach to roll and heave. He turned his head and vomited to the floor. Father Peter shook his head sadly. "You see, Johnny, the wolf in you already tries to ascend. This is wolf's bane. It will help you. It will keep the wolf at bay until the others arrive." He dipped his fingers back into the jar and, taking a deep breath, rubbed the ointment deep into the claw marks across Johnny's chest. The pain was unbelievable. A searing heat screamed through the wounds, filling his mind, his world. He gave out a single ear-piercing scream and then fell into blessed darkness. He awoke some time later to the sound of chanting, his body covered in sweat. He was still tied to the altar, but there was no sign of Father Peter. Instead, 3 men stood about him. All were well dressed in the vestments of the priesthood, but their faces were scarred and cruel. Suddenly, they stopped their chanting, and another man stepped forward out of the shadows. He was dressed like the rest, apart from the thick leather gloves in which he held a small steaming chalice. The other men parted as a man came forward. "This will cure you, boy. Cure you or kill you. Either way, Lucifer will not have your soul this night." What are you doing?" Johnny tried to ask between parched lips, but the men looming above him had already started their vicious chanting, once again filling the small church with bastard Latin. The man in the gloves leaned over Johnny and, muttering a prayer, poured molten silver into Johnny's wounds. He awoke 2 days later. A damp cloth pressed against his cracked lips. He sucked at the moisture greedily until it was taken away and used to softly wipe his face. "You must wake now, Johnny. You must grow strong for the days ahead." Johnny recognized the voice of Father Peter, and his eyes flew open, his body twisting to get away, but the priest held him firmly, but gently. "It's all right now, Johnny. No one will hurt you now. I'm sorry for the pain you have endured, but you were sick, poisoned. We've made you well again. Now is a time for healing and reflection." "My mother, my father?" Johnny asked, already knowing the answer but unable to grasp the concept in a tired child's mind. "I am sorry, my son," Father Peter said, stroking the boy's tired brow. "But they are gone to everlasting glory." "You mean they're dead?" The tears came easy now, hot and flowing down his face. "Yes," Father Peter replied, shedding his own tear as he made the sign of the cross over Johnny's bed. "They were good people, your mother and father. They didn't deserve such a fate." "What happened to them?" Johnny asked, trying to sit up. Father Peter tried to help him, but pain shot through him, and he sank back down with a groan, his hands pressed against his bandaged chest. "It's too soon to talk of such things now. Johnny, you must eat, sleep, and rest. When you are strong enough, we shall talk again." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur for Johnny. He was mostly left alone with his grief, and he slept a lot, only waking when Father Peter brought him his meals or came to change the tight bandages wrapped around Johnny's chest. The first time he had seen what was left of his chest, he had vomited and then fainted dead away. Now the great wounds were healing, but the same could not be said for Johnny's mind. He still escaped his grief in the deep comfort of sleep, and refused to get out of bed for any reason other than to use the bathroom. Even when Father Peter offered to take him outside for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, he still refused. This room, this bed, had become Johnny's refuge. To leave was to accept all that had happened to him, and that Johnny refused to do. Until, on the 15th day, all his options were taken away from him. He awoke to the sound of raised voices, then heavy footsteps on the stairs. His door was rudely pushed open. A man stood there, framed in the doorway. Johnny took one look at that scarred and terrible face and began to scream. Then Father Peter was there, holding him tight, crooning gentle words into his ear. "You're scaring him, Matthew," Father Peter snapped at the other man. The man in the doorway ignored his words and looked around the room with disdain. "You say he has not left these rooms in 2 weeks?" The man's tone was accusatory as he turned to glare at Father Peter. "I saved his life, yes, saved his life and cared for him after you left him in a bed of pain. I would have not caused the boy any harm if it was not necessary. My men and I saved his soul, and you know it, Peter." "I know, old friend," Father Peter said, some of the anger leaving him. "But he is so young, and already has been through so much." "And a long way to go yet," the other man said, sitting down at Johnny's feet, slowly and carefully, so as not to scare the boy. "I am Father Matthew. I can see by your face that you remember me. I am sorry for the pain I caused you, but it was necessary, for the sake of your soul, that you were cleansed of that creature's filth." "What was it?" Johnny asked in a small voice. The man seemed pleased by the boy's question, but Father Peter shook his head sadly and turned away. "It was a demon, Johnny, a lycanthrope, a werewolf." Seeing the boy's confusion, he went on. A man possessed by a demon wolf, you understand." But Johnny could only shake his head. He was a boy of 8, brought up in a quiet rural community, and knew nothing of such terrors until one had torn his life apart. Father Matthew, sensing some of the boy's thoughts, patted him gently on the knee and stood up, turning to Father Peter. "I will return at 7 p.m. sharp. I want him ready to leave, Peter. You've done all you can for him. Now is our turn to bring him closer to God." Father Peter said nothing, only nodded his agreement and left. The other man lingered a moment longer, looking down at Johnny, his eyes searching. Then, abruptly, he turned and walked away. That evening found Johnny stood outside St. Anthony's, watching as the shadows grew deeper. Father Peter stood by his side, silent and unmoving. After what seemed like an eternity, a mud-splattered Land Rover drew up beside them, and Father Matthew clambered out. He did not speak, but stood silently as Father Peter squatted down beside Johnny and turned the boy to face him. "I am sorry I couldn't do more for you, Johnny," he said, plucking at the loose clothes that covered the boy's skinny frame. On that first night he had burned what was left of Johnny's torn and bloodied clothes. Now the boy wore clothes salvaged from a church charity box, ill-fitting but at least warm and clean. You saved my life," Johnny said shyly. "I hope so, boy," Father Peter said, pulling him close for a hug, all the while looking up at Father Matthew. "I really hope I have." Standing abruptly, he ruffled the boy's hair. "Go with God, Johnny," he said, before turning away and stepping back inside. And a large hand fell on Johnny's shoulder. "Come on, boy," Father Matthew said, opening the passenger door for him. "We have a long way to go, and time is fleeting." They drove all night, only stopping twice at the motorway services to use the bathroom and grab a couple of packs of stale sandwiches. Father Matthew spoke little and smoked a lot. He seemed unsettled, even uncomfortable in the presence of a child. Equally, Johnny felt small and scared in the presence of the big, grim-faced man. At last, just as the first light of day started to stain the sky, they turned off onto a narrow country road and pulled in beside another couple of parked cars. Father Matthew climbed out and stretched before coming round to Johnny's side and ushering him out. They were on a cliff side overlooking the dark waters of the Atlantic. Behind them was a large copse of trees that hid a small hillock with a large metal door embedded in its side. As Johnny watched on, Father Matthew produced a bunch of metal keys from his coat pocket and unlocked the door. From over the big man's shoulder, Johnny could just see a set of narrow metal steps heading down into a poorly lit interior. "Come on, boy," Father Matthew said, turning to Johnny and pointing down towards the stairs. "The others will be waiting for us." But Johnny would not move. "Where are we? What is this place?" "We are in Cornwall, Johnny," Father Matthew replied, taking him gently by the arm and nudging him forward. "This is an old ammo bunker from the Second World War. It used to belong to the MOD. There was a gunnery range here once, but land belongs to the church now. Come on now. No more questions. We still have much to do." Johnny knew it would be useless to delay any further and fell in behind Father Matthew as he descended the heavy metal stairs. The only sound was the echo of the footfalls and the fading sound of birdsong as they descended lower into the complex. Suddenly, Father Matthew stopped in front of another metal door. Once again, out came the keys, and the door was quickly opened. Inside was a chamber filled with old metal cots and wooden chairs piled into a corner against the rust-streaked walls. Hurrying past these, they headed into a narrow corridor that branched off to the right until they stood in front of another metal door. Here, Father Matthew stopped and sank down to one knee, facing Johnny. "In this room," he whispered, "are 4 men. They will ask you to do something, Johnny. A kind of test, and a harsh one at that. If you pass, you'll be given over to me for your training." "What training?" Johnny tried to ask, but the big man gently placed a rough finger across his lips. "No time for questions, boy, not now. But know this, Johnny, if you fail to do what these men ask of you, it will take you from here, far away. You'll spend the rest of your life in some god-forsaken monastery in the arse end of nowhere. They will bring you up in the faith and make you take vows of silence. They will be kind to you, but prison's a prison, boy, and you'll never be allowed to leave. Now, try not to be afraid, Johnny. I will be with you, and I shall pray for you. I can do no more for you now. Come." He said it gently, taking his arm. "Let's get this done." The first thing that Johnny noticed as he came through the door was 4 men sitting at a table in the middle of the room. The second thing was an undressed man, gagged and chained to the wall behind them. For a moment, the world seemed to grow darker, and he staggered. Only Father Matthew's strong hands kept him from collapsing. "Stand up," Father Matthew hissed, shaking him roughly. "Now is not the time for weakness." It's him," Johnny whimpered. You don't understand it. It's him." "I know who he is, boy. That's why you are here." "Enough talk," one of the men at the table said, standing and glaring at Father Matthew. "Is this what you brought us, Matthew? This boy who whimpers and faints in fear? Is this who you want to apprentice to our sacred cause?" Yes, Father Matthew said, stepping in front of Johnny as if to shield him from the other man's gaze. Yes, I do. I intend to train him and make him my personal apprentice. Only if he passes the test, the other man quickly countered. What would you know of a test, Roberto? What would you know about any of this? You're nothing more than a glorified clerk, a go-between between the warriors of God and His Holiness the Pope. I am a cardinal, the other man said, his eyes blazing. How dare you speak to me that way? Now, another man said, standing from his position round the table. No need for such anger. We are all men of God and all of us cardinals. Father Matthew is more than aware that we are his superiors in rank, if nothing else. Isn't that correct, Matthew? For a moment, the two men's eyes locked and a silent message seemed to pass between them. Of course, Your Eminence, Father Matthew said, lowering his gaze. It has been a long drive, and I am not so young as I once was. None of us are, my son. None of us are. Well, except this young man, he said, coming from around the table and kneeling before Johnny. I am Cardinal James Malloy, of the Most Holy Roman Catholic Church, and you are Johnny Masterson. I've heard much about you, Johnny, and I know that God has tested you harshly, and still more to come. The other man sat at the table. Suddenly all stood and removed the table and chairs from the centre of the room. As if heeding some silent command, they melted back into the shadows. Yet Johnny could feel their eyes watching. You know this man, don't you, Johnny? The Cardinal said, gently taking his hand and drawing him forward. Yes, Johnny whispered, his voice hitching. He killed my mummy and Daddy. Yes, he did, Johnny, the Cardinal replied, his voice growing steely. He has killed lots of mummies and daddies, and little children too. He isn't really a man, Johnny. Do you know what he is? Yes, Johnny replied, wiping angrily at his tears in his eyes. He's a monster. That's right, Johnny, the Cardinal said, resting a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. He is a monster. A monster that would kill over and over again if we let him. But we're not gonna let him. You're not gonna let him, are you, Johnny? No, not ever again. Johnny was too young to understand the concept of fate or destiny. He only knew when the knife was placed in his hand that it felt right there, and the fear that had engulfed him, smothered him, made it hard to breathe since that terrible night evaporated. No, that wasn't right. It changed, evolved into something else. Outrage and white-hot desire for revenge. With a cry of hate, Johnny shook free of the Cardinal and charged at the chained man. The man's eyes widened as he saw the silvered knife and his death fast approaching. He tried to cry out as he strained and heaved against the chains. His muscles bunched, but it was too late. The knife slid into his stomach as if slicing through butter. He stabbed the man over and over, blood splattering his face and wrist. Yet the man still would not die. He felt a large hand cover his blood-slicked wrist and guide it upwards. It's the heart, Johnny, Father Matthew said from behind. Always go for the heart. And he did just that. Father Matthew lending him his great strength. Together, they thrust the blade forward, sliding between bone and piercing the heart within. For a moment, the man's eyes locked on Johnny, as if marking him forever. Then he fell, dead to the ground in a bloodied heap. Johnny dropped the knife, clattering to the ground, and groped for Father Matthew, who took the sobbing boy in his arms. Hate is a seed that grows, Johnny, he whispered in his ear. You will need that hate. It'll sustain you through the long years. We'll cultivate it together, you and I. That said, he scooped up the young boy, walked past the silent cardinals, and out into their future. That had been over 30 years ago, and now Johnny was here, hunting what he suspected was the same kind of creature that had so mercilessly destroyed his family. But he was no longer a frightened little boy who had wept uncontrollably after his first kill, but an experienced hunter who had destroyed all manner of evil in the name of God. Yet this job unnerved him. There was something wrong with this place. For one thing, it seemed the entire village was deserted. He had arrived yesterday, after receiving a desperate email from a Father Nicholas, the village priest, who had awoken in the early hours of the morning to the grisly sight of 2 dead bodies in the graveyard. Both had been torn up, claw marks defiling their poor, broken bodies. Sinew and bone gleamed in the early morning light. Both the victims' hearts had been missing. Stuffed in their place, filling the empty cavities, were pages from the Bible, both quoting Revelation. And the beast, behold, a beast will walk among them. Father Nicholas had quickly snapped some photos and sent a frantic email to the Vatican requesting advice. He was told in no uncertain terms to remove the bloody pages, to burn them, then call the local police and let the authorities take over. Help would be with them soon.